When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How did I get, first of all, time out, because I only got 5 minutes now, 5 minutes. 2 medical degrees, no mom, no dad in the house, worked my way through college, sat there and hustled my butt off to get through college. You gonna tell me somebody that looked like all y'all white folks kept me from doing that? Are you serious? Not one white person ever came to me and say, well, son, you're never going to be able to get nowhere because you know the black people. But guess what? What's sickening about this whole thing is what y'all doing right now is already something I do in my community right now to speak out against stuff because black folks are getting told by other black folks, oh, you know you ain't going to be able to do nothing out there in the world because them white folks ain't going to let you get no, or you know you're not going to be able to do it here because you know, the white man going to keep you down. Well, how did I get where I am right now? Are you going to sit here and tell me this lie of critical race theory? This the reason why black folks can't get ahead because of white folks? Are you kidding me? This is what we come to now. I can't believe we even talking about this right now. The last thing I'm going to say right here is something that's crazy. Martin Luther King said he wanted his kids to grow up in a world where they are judged by the contents of their what? Their character, not their skin. If they letting this stuff go on right now, it is absolutely doing the complete reverse of what he's doing. So when February comes, don't talk about Martin Luther King. I'm in the hood. I'm in the communities. I'm out there with folks in their face. I've been doing this stuff since I was 18 years old, talking to black folks. And you know what? None of them are buying this nonsense. None of them are. But if you want to implement this into the school system, I guarantee you to the day that I die, I'm going to be the very person right there debunking stuff, tearing stuff down, letting them know they can do exactly what I did and get exactly where I am by putting themselves to work and getting there. And ain't not one white person ever going to keep any of them from getting there. So the CRT stuff, BS.
CRT is not racial sensitivity or simply teaching unfavorable American history or teaching Jim Crow history. CRT is deeper and more dangerous than that. CRT, in its outworking today, is a teaching that there is a hierarchy in society where white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied people are deemed the oppressor, and anyone else outside of that status is oppressed. If this continues, we will look back and be responsible for the dismantling of the greatest country in the world by reverting to teaching hate and that race is a determining factor on where your destiny lies.
CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
Daddy teaches you can be anything in this world that you want to be, right? Don't Daddy teach you that?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you're black or white or any color.
Doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, yellow, right?
Black.
And how we treat people is based on who they are and not what color they are.
And if they're nice and smart.
See, this is how children think right here. Critical race theory wants to end that.
Even though you don't know anyone, you can make friends.
Yeah, you can make friends, no matter what color they are. So we need to stop CRT, period, point blank. Children do not see skin color, man. They love everybody. If they're good people, they love them.
We pray for people that are hurt.
All right, everybody, welcome to Studio B. I am your host, Pastor MDH. Thank you so very much for joining us here on the set again. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe, and then right to the right of subscribe, there's a little bell. Please click that so that you will be in the know and be notified every time we go live or drop another video. Today, for part number two, on our last podcast, we dove into the CRT issue, the critical race theory, CRT as it is affectionately known. And we talked about last week about you can't get away from this. It is everywhere that you turn. On the news, on social media, there is being bombarded by the issues of CRT. Critical race theory we did on the previous podcast. If you did not get a chance to watch that podcast, there's a link right here to the top. You can go ahead and click that, go back and look at that, where I give you the history of CRT or the critical race theory and those proponents who actually incubated the thing that is in the news today. So you need to look at that podcast before you can get caught up on this podcast, because this is part 2 of critical race theory. What in the world is it? How does it affect us? What is the core concept of CRT? So we talked about last podcast that it originated right around 1970-ish, but the actual birth of CRT was in 1989 at what was a workshop called New Developments in Critical Race Theory. And it was perpetuated by one of the founders, Kimberly Crenshaw, when she brought together a group of thinkers to talk about the issue of critical race theory. Now, remember, from last podcast, CRT was actually birthed out of critical theory. And if you went to college, you've taken humanities classes, and of course, you've talked about critical theory, you've studied it, you've wrote papers about it. So critical race theory is actually birthed out of critical theory, which is an offset of critical legal studies, CLS. And the difference between critical race theory and critical legal studies is that CRT said that CLS did not dive deep enough into the racial disparity. And so CRT made as its crux or foundation the racial element to all of the ills of today. And so the difference between those two are really quite profound when you're talking about CRT. CRT focuses and as at the base of its argument, race and race alone. That every social ill that we face today, from those who they would consider to be the bottom class, and those would be minority, and not just minority, as we talked about on the last podcast. It is specifically African Americans. So when you're looking at CRT, even though it's critical race theory, which would in theory include all races, there are two races that are talked about in critical race theory, and that is the white race and the black race. When you boil it all down, when you get through all of the weeds, there are two races within critical race theory that is always at the forefront of this ideology, and that is the white race and the black race. It is one race against the other race. It is the white race against the black race and the black race against the white race. So even though in theory race would assume Hispanic, Asian, and any other ethnicity, at the root of CRT is white versus black. And this can be found and this can be researched. And I pray and I hope that you go and do research after you look at this podcast so that you will be in the know. The Bible says that in all thy getting, get understanding. And so this thing about CRT is rooted in social constructionalism. And I talked about the 5 tenets of CRT. The first tenet being that the notion that racism is ordinary and not aberrational. The second one is that the idea of interest convergence. We talked about that a lot. And 3, the social construction of race, to which I absolutely agree that race and racism are social constructs. I do absolutely agree with CRT in their third tenet that race is a social construction. Especially because I am a Bible man. I believe in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 and 28, that let us make man in our own image and according to our own likeness. And when God spoke about people groups, he did not speak about people groups in the terms of races. He would speak about people groups in terms of regions. So he would say things like the Hittites, the Amorites, and the like. So he talked about people from region, not according to races. So I agree with one of the tenets of CRT that race is a social construct. The fourth tenet of CRT is the idea of storytelling and counter storytelling. The fifth notion is that whites whites are antithetical to the movement of civil liberties, and at the crux of everything that is not equal, you will find a white man. And it's critical that you understand that it's not just the white race, it's the white man that CRT has particular issues with. We talked about that in depth. And again, go back to the last podcast to really catch yourself up to speed on the 5 tenets of CRT. CRT is a wide-ranging entity, but it can be boiled down into 5 basic tenets. And Delgado is one of the founders of CRT that actually put these 5 tenets in place. And so if you want to understand CRT from a 30,000-foot view, then you need to understand the 5 tenets of how it operates. I will further say this, just like with anything else that is meant to bring about awareness, it gets hijacked when they understand the possibilities of it. When there is money and power to be grasped, typically movements like that get hijacked. And this is just par for the course when you're looking at any great movement that has happened here in the United States or even around the world. It gets hijacked for political gain and for economic gain. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s got hijacked by those secretly within those particular movements that were looking to make a name for themselves, either politically or economically, and sold out the cause for those powers to be gained. Anytime that you're looking at great movements, there is the potential for those to be hijacked and take the movement in a different direction, which is why I have long since said about the Black Lives Matter movement that we will again talk about today. That Black Lives Matter, the movement of itself, that people were on the front lines and they were championing for change, those people are different than the ones of the Black Lives Matter movement, the organization. The organization got hijacked, and it got hijacked almost from day one. This is not, and it is not the same Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013, 2014. And it is the same way with CRT. When CRT first originated in 1970s, but the birth of CRT was in 1989. At the birth of CRT, there was some really, really profound things that this particular movement was trying to accomplish. CRT is an academic movement. Remember, we talked about that last podcast. It is an academic movement, which it is meant to teach and to inspire, particularly those who are uneducated in this particular arena. So last week, I talked about my issues with CRT, and let me just remind them of you again. One, if our fight against racism and injustice and prejudice is being done through what perhaps, in my humble opinion, is the worst tyranny of all, and that's namely the tyranny of the mind. This thing up here, this little mind that we have, this thing that makes your hands move, makes your feet go, makes your eyes go this way or that way, this thing that literally controls our whole body is the epicenter of our soul. We must absolutely guard what goes into this mind. And I'm reminded of this powerful quote by Alan Bloom that says, freedom of the mind requires not only or not even specially the absence of legal constraints, but the presence of alternative thoughts. The most successful tyranny is not the one that uses force to ensure uniformity, but the one that removes the awareness of other possibilities. When there is a singular thought, and that singular thought is the way of the land, and there is no tolerance for differences of thought, you enter into tyranny. Secondly, the CRT issue or debate as it rages right now in 2021 leaves absolutely no room for meaningful discourse. And again, this is something that I've said, I even would dare say even ad nauseum, that we have entered into a space unlike any other place in our history, that we're just not allowed to disagree. Disagreement is just not tolerated in our public forums. And I even mean this even to the degrees of where we're sending our kids to college and sending our kids to these higher learning institutions. Differences of thought are just not tolerated. Thirdly, if we want to fight racism, injustices, and prejudices, then we must shape our conversation around concrete solutions of implementation and not buzzwords or rhetoric. If we're going to move the needle in a very positive way and address specific issues, we have to put forth concrete solutions of implementation and not say buzzwords like systematic racism or white privilege. We have to be able to define these things not in the buzzwords of society, but really peel them back and see what does that mean and how do we implement these things for real change that I really believe that everybody wants to see. Even the proponents and antagonists on either side, I believe at the core of all of that, there is some sliver of change that people want to see. Now, what that may look like, unfortunately, is up for debate. So unfortunately, many people just lack the vocabulary to talk about racism and prejudice without using the framework of systematic racism or white privilege. Many times that you hear that this particular issue of racism or racisms in America, we talk about systematic racism. We put everything under the broad umbrella of systematic racism and white privilege. Well, we're going to talk about those in depth on today. Because we need to talk about this from a place that we're not disparaging anybody, we're not tearing anybody down, but there's always the counterbalance. As a counselor, even when I'm counseling couples, I tell people that there's three sides. There's your side, there's his side, and then there's the truth. Because everybody bends the story to their own benefit. Like everybody does that. You do that. When you're watching right now, you're listening right now, when you're in an argument with your significant other or a friend or anybody else, you bend the conversation to your benefit because it's just what we do. So there's your side, there's my side, and then there is the truth. The truth is the truth that is the truth, notwithstanding any particular biases that may be imputed into it. So this thing about systematic racism and white privilege are the buzzwords that gets everybody excited. But hopefully through this, we will be able to tear down this broad category and break it down into specifics so that we can really talk about it in a positive way. So I said, if you disagree with this philosophical framework, then you will by default fighting against racism or for racism, and you even deny that it exists. And if you push back against the use about power struggle and systematic racism, then you are tap dancing to the white man. You have sold out and you don't love your people. If you disagree with the systematic racism or the framing of the power struggle, then you're just not in the know. And unfortunately, that creates a broad range of disparaging ideas that will never converge at the table of conversation. So I want to talk about a couple of things here that I have said and that I believe, because last week I told you about critical race theory right now as it relates in 2021 has two main points. Okay, they have the event and then they have the cause. So if they have a black man that has murdered another black man, the event, CRT will trace the event back to the cause. And even though it's a black man that murdered another black man, CRT says at the end of that struggle, at the beginning of that struggle, the cause is a white man. That a white man is somewhere in whatever that event was. That's CRT. CRT lifts up one race while tearing down another. And there are several things that are wrong with CRT. There are several things that are right with CRT, as I previously alluded to, that I believe in a couple of those tenets that they do propagate. There are some things about CRT that are worth diving into and worth having meaningful conversations about, because, you know, even if you've watched this podcast for any length of time, I believe that there is a gap that exists between the educational gap, the economic gap. I do believe that we need real judicial reform. I do believe in those core issues, and I believe that there are concrete measures that we can put forth in order to achieve that goal. But as long as we keep running around the barn with these buzzwords and getting everybody excited, we will never come together at the table of conversation to put forth implementation to address the issues. And so I do believe that a couple of those tenets that CRT has are very, very valid. Very, very, very valid. One of the things that they talk about and that I have talked about very, very ad nauseum at times is this social construction thesis. We know that America has a very checkered past. And we talked about on a previous podcast that the ideals, and please hear that word, ideals of America, the 1776 document, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the ideals of America were not lived up even at the signing of those fundamental documents. When those documents were penned by our forefathers, those rights that are in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights were not necessarily reality to the people in the nation at that time. It was an ideal, okay? So we know that even when they penned it, even when they signed their name to it, that many that signed the Declaration of Independence had slaves as they were signing the Declaration of Independence. The ideals of America were not always lived up to. America has a very, very checkered history and things that it must be able to talk about and acknowledge. Those are things that we come to the table of conversation and we agree with. I further told you that last podcast that, going to Israel is one of my 3 times I've been to Israel. It is by far, if you take Africa and Israel, you put them side by side, it will be hard for me to tell you which one was the most profound trip in my life. But when I go to Israel, I see Jews and Jewish people Jews will never lose their history. They will never, ever, 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 ever lose their history. Because Jews they have a system in place to where as they are coming up from Yehi to a grasshopper, they understand about the struggle of the Jewish people. And so parents teach their children about the struggles of the Jewish race, of the Jewish people. And so I'm talking about from the Pentateuch, I'm talking about from the bar mitzvahs, I'm talking about from the Torah that is on every exit and entrance in their door. They make sure that they never lose their history. African Americans, with each passing generation, we are losing our history because we don't teach our children about our history. We just don't. Our history is fading to the background with every passing generation. So this generation that is currently on the scene right now is not teaching their children about the rich history that is African American ancestry, and we are relegating that, if you will, to the schools to tell them something good in the month of February. So we are losing our history generation upon generation because we're not teaching about the struggle. And therefore, we have very ignorant people who are walking around talking about things that they're really not qualified to talk about because they don't understand the history behind it. And so there is a thing of this social construction that we need to understand. America does have a very checkered past. We know Dred Scott versus the Sanford case. That's where the U.S. Supreme Court declared that Negroes, whether freed or enslaved, were not citizens. We know about the one-drop rule, the relic from the Jim Crow era, that one drop of African-American blood made you black. We know about the 1935 minority rule that eliminated people of color from Social Security benefits and from union memberships. As we go along the line of America's history, we can definitely point to injustices that have been perpetrated specifically against people of color. And that's one of the ways that I agree with CRT, and that is to bring that knowledge to the forefront and expose people to that truth who otherwise wouldn't know. So in 1989, when the CRT really got birthed, it really had a strong passion behind it to educate people on what the history of the African-American race was. And I believe that it was a noble cause. But just like anything else, it got hijacked. And the current CRT as it exists right now in 2021 is not the same of 1989. It is a much, 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 much different movement. So with that, we talked about some unspeakable truths. I wrote this down on the last podcast because I wanted to make sure that I articulated this very, very clearly. I didn't want to just speak from a sense of just speaking. I wanted to write it down. And here's what I wrote down. Let me repeat it to you again. That my responsibilities as a Christian, a black man, and an American are not in conflict. I defend this position the best way that I can, and I also try to illustrate the threat of cancel culture and what it poses to the rational discourse about racial inequity in America that our country so desperately requires. Finally, I will try to model how a Christian and a black man who truly loves his people should respond. How a Christian and a black man should respond, the one that truly loves his people. I will do so by enunciating out loud what has increasingly become very unspeakable truth, and then I ask you to brace yourself. And so my points of view and the way in which I argue is, one, as a Christian. I reason as a Christian. The Christian, my Christendom, dominates my life. And let me tell you how this works. When you die, you will die a black man. Now, if you are in Christ Jesus and you have the Holy Spirit residing on the inside of your heart and God is leading you, you are a Christian first and foremost, okay? Because you will die a Christian and you will live as a believer. A black man will die as a black man, but I won't live in heaven as a black man. Okay, it's not going to be black people over here, white people over here, Hispanics over there. So as a Christian and a black man and as an American, my ideas and my responsibilities are not in conflict to those three segments of my life. So I articulate that from that vantage point. One, as a Christian, as a black man, and as an American. Because I am a Christian. I've been black all my life. I'll be 48 years old should the Lord spare my life in September. I've been black all of my life. I understand what the black experience is, and I do not need people telling me what being black is all about, because I've lived it for 48 years. So we have to talk about some very, very unspeakable truths. And these are conversations that we typically don't want to have, but we got to have these conversations, y'all. We have to have these conversations. You have to be courageous enough and bold enough to offend. It is Jordan Peterson who this particular quote I've said so many times. It is just in my spirit that if you're not offending anyone, then you're just not saying anything. At the risk of saying something profound is the risk of offending someone. Offense is kind of, it's par for the course. Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, as he spoke profoundly, as he would speak, he would offend. It's just par for the course. We got to have courage and we got to have boldness and we got to be educated about the issues that we are talking about so that we can actually move the needle and stop talking in rhetoric. There's some unspeakable truths that we just have to be able to talk about. And one of those things is downplaying behavioral disparities by race. Downplaying the behavioral disparities by race. In Chicago just this weekend, 74, now we're talking about from Friday to Saturday, from Friday to Sunday. In one weekend, 74 people were shot and 6 people were killed. 2 of them were under the age of 10. In just 2 days, 74 people got shot and 6 people died. 2 of those people that died were under the age of 10. And out of those 74 people that got shot, 69 of them were black. Out of the 6 people who died, all of them were black. What does the one that says Black Lives Matter say to that tragic news story? How does the one that says Black Lives Matter respond to that particular fact? Not a notion, not an instance, a fact. And we can take that particular one in Chicago and broad stroke it across the mainstream America and talk about all the things that are happening within Black America. How do we respond to that? And to not understand the behavioral disparities by race is not being true to the conversation. And I understand, everybody, it's 2021. I do understand that we're in a much different world than we were 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. I understand that when new generations come, new things, new forms, new habits are on the landscape. I get that. I completely get that. But the first unspeakable truth is that when we downplay behavioral disparities by race, we're not being true to the conversation. We're just not being true to the conversation. When we don't talk about pathology, when we don't talk about behavioral issues, when we don't talk about the things that we are doing, we're not being true to the conversation. So socially mediated behavioral issues lie at the root of today's racial inequity problem. They are real and they must be faced squarely if we are to grasp why racial disparities persist. This is a painful necessity. Activists on either side politics claim that white supremacy, implicit bias, or old-fashioned anti-black racism are sufficient to account for black disadvantages. But this is a bluff that relies on the cancel culture in order to be sustained. Those making such arguments are, in fact, daring you to disagree with them. They are threatening to cancel you if you do not accept their account. And you must be a racist or a boot-licking black man if you do not believe that something is intrinsically wrong with black people and how they are not able to reach certain heights because the white man is holding them down. What do we say when we do not address pathological issues within our community? How do we not govern ourselves, police ourselves? Now, as I take this thing and parenthetically go around this little cul-de-sac, I'll get back on the street just for a second. As I've said many times before, I'm 48 years old, but I've been raised around old people, like old people. My grandmother, my uncles, just people that were older than me. I've always gravitated to people who were older than me. I've even though I had friends in my same sphere, the people that really spoke into my life were people that had much more life experience. They were much more accomplished than I am and was. And therefore, I just found comfort in sitting down at the feet of some of the old schoolers and listening to life. I've always been like that, man. I just want to be around somebody that has been there and done that. And they can teach me how to navigate through the pitfalls of life so that I don't make the same mistakes that they made. I like the old school. This new school of thought is something that I'm still trying to get into. I like the old school, right? So I've been raised around that. And when I've been raised around the old school, I see myself and see them as being able to pour into my life and give me wisdom that I can't necessarily find in books and or research. And when I listen to the old school and when I listen to those who have gone before me, I see people when they talk about the struggle, they talk about the struggle. They talk about the actual struggle, like the real meat and potatoes of the struggle. My grandmother, I talk about her a lot. God bless her soul. She went on to be with the Lord in 2018. But she was alive during Emmett Till. She remembers white water fountain, black water fountain. Now I got, big bottles of water that I can go and get and fill my cupboard with not water from a water fountain, but purified spring water, right? So this is my reality now. This is our reality now, not drinking out of a white water fountain or a black water fountain. This is our reality in 2021. So when I talk to them about the struggle and they talk about the power and the issues of the struggle, I am greatly enriched by their testimonies. So people must think that blacks are inferior, or how else could you explain these type of disparities? Blaming the victim is the offense that will convict you of if you are lucky. Blaming the victim for what the victim has been transpired against is something that is going on right now in our nation ad nauseum. The invocation of the structural racism is a political argument, is both a bluff and a bludgeon. The structural racism by which we are constantly trying to tell people that they cannot arise to a certain level because there are systems that are in place and people that are over them that will not allow them to reach a certain mark or to reach a certain level. But it is a bluff in the sense that it offers an explanation, and this is not an explanation at all. And in effect, it dares the listener to come back. So, for example, if someone says there are too many blacks in prison and in the U.S. due to structural racism or systematic racism or the prison industrial system, what you're being dared to say is, no, blacks are among so many criminals, and that's why there's so many in prison. It's their fault, not the system's fault. And at the base of this thing called structural racism, we get into this idea of the blame game. Now, the blame game is nothing new to the world. Genesis chapter number 2, God tells Adam, of all the trees in the garden you shall freely eat, but the one tree that is in the middle of the garden, you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So God gave him 99 trees and said, there's one tree that you cannot take of, you cannot eat, you cannot touch. Don't go to that tree. You got 99 others to choose from. You just have one that is off limits. And he says, in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely That was a command from God given to Adam. Now, Adam, being Adam, we know from Genesis chapter number 2, when he gets the direct command from God, that at some point in time, we don't know specifically when, but at some point in time, he communicates that command that God gave him to his wife. Because the wife was not there when God got the command or gave the command to Adam not to eat of the tree that is in the middle of the garden. It was just Adam by himself. Adam did not receive Eve until God placed him in a deep sleep and pulled Eve from his rib. So Adam was alone when he got the commandment from God not to eat of the tree that was in the middle of the garden, because in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. But in Genesis chapter number 3, the serpent comes in and beguiles Eve and talks about, has God said that you shall not eat of it? And so she gets into this dialogue with the serpent, and long story short, you know the story. She eats of the forbidden fruit, or the tree. She eats of that tree, the same tree that God told Adam not to eat, the same tree that God told Adam not to eat, and then Adam told his wife not to eat, and she ate of its fruit. But interestingly enough, as she ate of the fruit, nothing happened. She turned around and handed it to her husband, and then her husband ate of the fruit, and then their eyes became open. So it wasn't until Adam ate of the forbidden tree that their eyes became open. And then the Bible says that God was walking through the garden through the cool of the day, and he says, Adam, where are you? Adam, where are you? Adam, where are you? Not geographically, but Adam, where are you? Because me and you are used to walking in the cool of the day, and now you're not here. And then Adam's was hiding himself, and he says, I hid myself from you. God then tells to Adam, why are you hiding from me? Who told you that you were naked? And this interesting dialogue goes on between God and Adam. And then watch this. God asked him, have you eaten of the forbidden tree? And then here's what Adam says. It's that woman. It's that woman you gave me. That woman you gave me of the fruit, and I ate of it. So Adam's response was not personal responsibility. Adam's response when he ate of the tree was not to fall down on the sword and said, yes, God, yes, Father, I ate of the tree. His first response was to blame his wife. When God looks at Eve, he says, what have you done? Eve, in turn, then turns to the devil and says, the devil made me do it. So here we are in Genesis chapter number 3, when we have God talking to Adam. Adam shifts the blame to Eve. When God turns to Eve, she shifts the blame to Satan and says, the devil made me do it. So the blame game is nothing new to our society. We do it all the time. And if you're honest, when you mess up, you look for a scapegoat. If you're honest, when you mess up, when you cross the line, when you do something that you're not supposed to do, intrinsically, instantly within our minds, we try to find a scapegoat. We try to find the why did I do it in order to justify what we did. We all do it. And some of us scratch and scratch and scratch, and we dig and we dig and we dig in order to get the emphasis off of us and our actions, because it's easier to blame someone else for my issues. It is easier than to look in the mirror and put all of the blame on myself and the decisions that I made. So this thing about blame and shifting the blame so that other people feel good about what they've done is nothing new to society. Nothing new at all. Now it is just politicized. It has gone from the spiritual emphasis by which it was created, by which it was first birthed, and now it has just been politicized, and it's been politicized for power and economic gain. So when someone does anything wrong, the first thing we do is not say, why did you do it? We tell that person, why did you do it? Find something else to point the finger at. It is just par for the course. Those of us who got kids and we raised them from yay high to a grasshopper, we know this quite well. When our kids get in trouble, what's the first thing they do is blame somebody else or something else. It's just par for the course. And when we're talking about structural racism, when we're talking about systematic racism, when we're talking about the white man won't let me do anything, when we're talking about I'm not where I should be in life, what makes us feel better is not looking at ourselves and asking ourselves the core questions. Have I done everything in my power to succeed in life? Have I personally exhausted all of the options that I could exhaust in order to be successful in this particular endeavor? That question, ladies and gentlemen, is much, much too hard for us to accept. And therefore, it's par for the course when we're blaming people and situations. Now, again, everybody, I shouldn't have to say it. I'm almost offended that I have to continually try to put this in here. But yes, everybody, racism exists. It exists covertly. It exists overtly. Okay, it's there. It's on the landscape of our nation. I told you that America was birthed, even in its founding, on racist principles. We absolutely understand that there may be somebody that may hold something against you because of the color of your skin, because of your sexual orientation, because of your religious affiliation, because because of that. That is absolutely there. It's on the landscape. But when we embed ourselves into the environment of structural racism and white privilege and further the ideology of white supremacy, then we purportedly characterize our society by explaining all of the ills within our communities on those particular pillars. So everything that's happening in the Black community, the bad that is going on, the 74 people that got shot in Chicago last weekend, that all 74 of those shootings, all 6 of those killings, trace it all back and it goes back to white supremacy. But see, that's an easy out. As opposed to us looking at the pathology of our lives, the behavioral issues and the behavioral choices that will bring about certain situations and consequences, and focusing on those, we don't want to have those conversations. And I believe that two things can be right at the same time. We can talk about the issues that need to be addressed: economic reform, social reform, educational reform, judicial reform. We can talk about those issues, talk about how we reinvent the prison system, the legal system, how we get some of these policies out that are clearly overtly racist, how we take those things out because they are outdated and inundated, and they disproportionately affect a particular group of people. We can have that conversation and put it on the table, and then we can also have the same conversation that, listen, you have choices, and your choices will bring about good or bad consequences. Both can be true at the same time. But yet, that's not what CRT is looking to do. CRT is looking, and at the base of this, everybody, at the base of this is the white man versus the black man versus the white man. Yes, there are Hispanics. Yes, there's Asians. Yes, there's this. Yes, there's that. But critical race theory is talking about two races, white versus black. It is not talking about anything else. When we talk about structural racism, it's not talking about racism or discrimination against the LGBT. It's not talking about racism against the Asian community. It's not talking about racism against the Italian community. It is talking about racism from white to black. That is what CRT is addressing. That is the main crux of CRT, and it is absolutely par for the course. So when you're talking about this thing about CRT, we have to be able to talk about this thing about structural racism. And the second unspeakable truth is just simply that this thing about structural racism is not an explanation. It's an empty category. It's not an explanation. Structural racism does not account for 74 people being shot over the weekend. It does not account for that. You can't put 74 people and stick them into the box of structural racism. It just doesn't work. It is an empty category. The invocation of structural racism is a political argument. It's a political argument, and it's a bluff. It's a political argument. It is a political tool that is thrown back and forth against the red and blue aisles. It is a political tool that is being used in the news media and through news sources and social media to excite a response amongst people groups. This thing about structural racism cannot be fit into every single category. It just doesn't work. Now, there are some things about structural racism where it fits. Again, my main crux about this is the prison system. The prison system is a structural racist system. It is. OK, they are even when you're looking at these new marijuana laws. OK, marijuana now is legal. So they have people that are making millions of dollars on marijuana openly, selling it at trade shows and conventions and selling brownies and pills and all of this stuff. Marijuana, they're selling it freely, smoking it freely. But yet there are thousands of people who are in prison right now on marijuana offenses. So if marijuana is now legal, then what should happen is that the sentences of those who have been convicted of marijuana should be commuted. If marijuana is now legal to be sold without consequence, and you can't go to jail for selling marijuana, and all you got to do, that's why everybody is flocking to Colorado in the back, and California to some degrees, but mainly Colorado. People are flocking to Colorado and making millions of dollars on marijuana. So how do we do this when we have given someone who's gotten caught with a pound of marijuana, first time offense, a non-violent crime? Why do we give that person 20 years in prison for a pound of marijuana, and marijuana is a non-violent crime? Okay, well, that's the structural part of racism that we can talk about. Those particular laws, which were written in the books years ago with the 1994 crime bill, need to be amended. Like, we need to have sit down conversations about that. Some of these things that are affecting our young people right now, especially on these drug charges, these non-violent charges that are affecting a people group disproportionately, we need to talk about. We need to have conversations about them. That's a part of structural racism that I absolutely agree with. And I don't think that you're going to find anybody worth their salt, that is going to disagree with those issues. Now, secondly, we got to do this thing about this morning when I was on my way in. I was bringing my daughter in, and we was having conversations, and I told her about something in my prayer time that God had revealed to me. About 5 years ago, I started taking a liking to oysters. I was one of those guys, when people would talk about oysters, I would be like, ew, I just didn't like it. But 5 years ago, I went out to a business lunch, and the guys that I was with, they ordered oysters. And they asked me if I wanted to order them. I said no. The oysters actually came to the table, and they would say, Pastor Holman, come on, why don't you go ahead and try these oysters? And so I did. For the first time 5 years ago, I tried oysters. And it was baked oysters, so they wasn't the raw kind. They were baked. And when I tried them, it wasn't that they were good. They were actually really, really good. And so 5 years have now come and gone, and every time I go to a seafood restaurant, I get baked oysters. I quite enjoy them now. But my view of oysters was solidified in my mind, even though I've never tried them. I had a disdain for oysters, even though I never tried them, even though I've never tasted an oyster prior to 5 years ago. I had a disdain about them. I had formed an opinion about something that I wasn't knowledgeable about, that I myself had never even attempted to try. And therefore, I told myself that oysters were nasty. I told myself that I didn't like it when I did not have a point of reference. This is one of the things that really, when I sit down and really think about it from a 30,000 foot view, the exposure of what it gives, the teaching level of exposure. When you expose people to different things, you give them a broader perspective. You give them a much broader perspective. When you expose them, when you allow them to see something that they've never seen before, you educate them in ways that books can't, that knowledge can't, that sitting in a classroom can't. I remember when we took a mission trip, and I took some young people from our ministry on a mission trip in 2016. We went down to the southern border in McAllen. And we went down to the southern border of McAllen to do some ministry work. I took about 35 of our youth, drove down there like a 6-hour drive, spent about 4 days down there doing some ministry work down in McAllen, Texas. We did some work right there on the border as people are crossing into the border. So we gave them care packages. We had fixed up a whole lot of stuff. We were giving them shoes and shirts and things of that nature, fruit, water. But out of those 35 kids that went on that mission trip, now this is still in Texas. This is at McAllen, Texas, at the foot, the southern border. Mexico is literally a hop, skip, and a jump away. Out of those 35 kids that went on that trip, 12 of those kids, I remember this specifically, 12 of those kids had never left the city of Houston. And when I talk about these kids, I'm talking about they were, I think the youngest one was 12. I think the oldest one was maybe 19. So from 12 to 19. And 12 of those kids that went on that mission trip to McAllen, Texas, still in the state of Texas, had never left the city of Houston. They never been out of the city of Houston. They've never been out of the city of Houston. Their worldview was shaped by the city of Houston. That's all that they knew was their neighborhood. That's all they knew was their community. That's all they knew was their school, their friends. They had no other point of reference other than what they saw every single day. So they were literally living life with blinders on. They could only see what was in front of them. So as we took them down to McAllen, Texas, and exposed them to other cultures, other people, other ministries, other ethnicities, when we got back to the hotel and we were doing our debriefs, many of these kids, when they wrote these papers, said that I would have never imagined me interacting with an Hispanic person at the level that we did during that mission trip. Now watch this. They would have never done that in the environment that they were at because they could not be exposed to it. They were in largely black communities, and it was all black. There was no white, there was no Hispanic, there was no Asian. They went to schools that were predominantly black. Their classmates were 96% black. So their worldview was shaped by the world that they lived in. And that was where they reasoned that was, and I want you to hear this, from that little bitty box called Houston, Texas. And when you give people exposure, when you get them out of the particular box that they have put themselves in, that they, to their own benefit, to these 12 kids, it's not their fault that they've never been out of the state of the city of Houston. It's not their fault that they've never seen anything other than Texas. I would say that if you look at their parents and talk to their parents would tell you the same thing, because generational cycles just continue until someone breaks the curse. So when we're talking about ideologies, I believe that exposure is one of the ways that you educate people that books cannot do. Books are great, but it cannot expose you. It allows you to imagine and to go to distant places in your imagination. And that's one thing that's wonderful. It's great. But you have to expose people to greater horizons. And I tell you in Jesus' name, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. That's why I have been purposeful in making sure that my children are well exposed. Not just to Houston, not just to Texas, not just to America, not just to black folks, not just to white folks, not just to Hispanics, but I want to expose my children to the world, especially today, because you're living in a world, a global market. And it enhances them in ways that other things cannot. So this idea that we have to fight back from is something that we need to put a lot of attention on, that because of structural racism, because of systematic racism, Black America is in the position that we are in. And we cannot achieve higher levels of success. We can't own businesses. We can't graduate college. We can't get out of the hood. We can't get out of the ghetto. We can only be poor. We can only do this. And that is simply because everybody keeps beating us down. Everybody, that is a lie from the pit of hell itself. We must be able to address the pathology of our race and the behaviors of our race, because it is something that is worth talking about. So lastly, I want to talk about this issue about these dark sides that people just don't like to talk about. And that is the idea, this unspeakable truth that is doesn't make a lot of sense. That when we talk about police killings of Black Americans, we got to put that into perspective. We have to put this into perspective. There are about 1,200 fatal shootings of people by the police in the U.S. every single year. Every single year. Every single year. There's right around about 1,200 of them. And I'm talking about justified and unjustified. It's all in the same category. Roughly about 250 to 300 of those are killed are African Americans, or about 1/4. While blacks only make up about 13% of the population. So the populace at large, and then those who are shot and killed by police. So that is a representation that is still far less than the majority of people that are killed. Now, I want to take you to something and give you some meat behind these numbers, because the idea of CRT, and let me further agree with CRT before I go in this direction. When we're looking at the 13th Amendment, everybody understands the 13th Amendment. If you don't understand the 13th Amendment, please go back and read the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment is one that stipulates that there should be no involuntary servitude in these United States. But here's the clause: with the exception of a committal of a crime. Okay, so there should be no involuntary servitude, that's slavery, in the United States. The 13th Amendment, 1863, signed by President Abraham Lincoln, abolished slavery in the United States. That's the 13th Amendment. Okay, it made slavery illegal. That there should be no involuntary servitude in the United States of America except by the commission of a crime. So the United States cannot forcibly put you into work camps, picking cotton, sugarcane fields, X, Y, and Z. They cannot forcibly put you in now by law, except if you committed a crime. So therefore, going back to a previous statement, that's why one of the conversation that we definitely need to have is about the prison system, because the prison system is slavery. It is legal slavery, not just in theory, not just in thought. That's not something clever that is being mixed up by X, Y, and Z. No, it is actually legal slavery by the definition of legal slavery by the 13th Amendment itself. So after the 13th Amendment was passed in 1863, ratified in June of 1863, I believe, after it was ratified and became law, you have 2+ million slaves, mainly in the South, that were now being freed. Okay, and you have a problem with these slaves because you have slaves that don't have education, that don't have places to stay, that don't have means by which they ought to take care of themselves, because most of them have been living on plantations. And while they are working, they are raising families on those plantations. And so they are eating from the crops by which they are harvesting for the slave master. So now the 13th Amendment comes along and frees all of these slaves. So now you have a problem. You got 2+ million slaves that are kind of wandering the landscape of America with nothing to do. They don't know how to read. They don't have valuable income. They don't know how to support their family. And so because slavery is a economic process, slavery is not by, just getting somebody to do X, Y, and Z. Slavery is a profitable business. That's why slave masters employ slaves. And I don't say employ slaves, implored slaves to do their bidding. Because as they would do the cotton fields, they would take the cotton bales and go and sell the cotton bales in the city. Thus, the slave owner would make money off the cotton that the slave owners picked for him for free. So he was making double, triple, quadruple, 10 times, 100 times profit on whatever the slaves were picking out of his field. So slavery was a very, very profitable environment. That's what the Civil War was about. The Civil War was not about the freeing of slaves. The Civil War was about money. Because if I allow slaves to go free, it's going to affect my money. Fast forward to the 13th Amendment. Now you got all of these slaves walking around the landscape of America with nothing to do. And now you have slave owners that are out of slaves. So now what do they have to do? They can't force the slaves to pick the cotton or to pick the sugar cane or to plow their fields. They can't do that now because it's illegal. And if they get caught doing it, they will lose their plantations. So now what do the slave masters have to do? Well, now they got to pay them. Now they got to pay the slaves that once used to work for free. Many of the slaves went back to the same plantations that they lived on and worked for the master. Okay, they worked for him. But what many of them did is said, hey, we got a problem and I got to fix. So now they put these things called vagrancy laws in. And they begin to make all of these particular laws, very, very minor laws, that if you were walking down the street in a particular town and it was from 9 to 5 and you were working through, walking down a particular street during the working hours of the day, there were vagrancy laws that put you in jail because you were not at work. So there were all these laws that were made up in order to get people back in. And so what did the real smart slave masters do? They moved their profits from the plantation to the prison farms. Okay, so the prisons would come in and then build on the master's plantations. Okay, so they would put prisons or jails in that day on the property of the plantations. And so now the slave master and the prison are in cahoots with each other. So now what's happening? So now he gets the same free work that he was getting before the 13th Amendment was signed, because these men and women were in jail for vagrancy laws. Remember, the only way that you can have involuntary servitude is unless you commit a crime. And so that's what happened. And so you got all of these things that are going on. So there is a portion that we need to talk about that overwhelmingly targets a particular group of people. But let's look at this from a numbers perspective in our time that we have left. This is table 43. You can find this information very, very easily. I find it on the FBI.gov. This is on their particular website. These are the 2017 crime stats in the United States of America, freely accessible to all. FBI.gov, you will find this in table 43. Table 43 is the arrests by race and ethnicity in 2017. Now, this is all of the legal agencies from FBI to CIA to the police department to the sheriff's department to colleges and universities. And the only universities that are not within this category are private universities because they have their own police system. So this is 12,599 agencies and a collection of data from 12,599 agencies in 2017. And the estimated population that that was affected by these 12,599 agencies is 253,405,839 people. That's the targeted population or the estimated population that was affected by these particular stats that you'll find in table 43A, the FBI.gov. Okay, the total arrest in 2017 is 2017 to 2020. Excuse me. So the total arrest is 8,400,000 162,849 arrests, okay, that 12,599 agencies compiled in all of their data, okay? And again, this is table spread 43A. Out of those 8,162,000, 5,626,140 were white. So out of the 8 million arrests, 5.6 million of those arrests were arrested white people. Out of that 8,162,000, 2.2 million were African or black or African American. Out of that 8,162,000, 196,000 of those were American Indian or Native Alaskan. 97,000 were Asian. 21,000 were Pacific Islanders. So you had 8 million arrests. 5.6 million of that 8 were white people. 2.2 million of that were African American. Okay. Out of that same time frame, you had, now watch this number, you had murder or non-negligent manslaughter. Out of that 8,162,849, there were 9,468 arrests for murder or non-negligent manslaughter. Out of that, 4,188 were white. Out of that, 5,025 were black. Rape. Out of that number that was arrested, 8,000,001, you have 18,063 total arrests within that 8 million, that 8.1 million. White, you have 12,187 white people, mainly white men, that were arrested for rape. You have 5,182 that were arrested that were black or African American. Robbery. You had 73,764 arrests that were made for robbery. 32,128 were white. 40,024 were black or African American. Aggravated assault, 188,000 were white, 101,000 were African American. Burglary, 104,000 were white, 46,000 were African American. Larceny or theft, 501,000 were white, 215,000 were African American. Motor vehicle theft, 46,000 white, 21,000 black. Now, as we're looking at the numbers, now I want you to hear this, the numbers, if the numbers are correct, and the populace of America is around 353 million, 360 million, whatever poll you may look at. And Black America, African American makes up about 14.2%, I think, is the number that I may be a couple of percentage points off, point percentages off, but right around the 14%. And then you have white, Anglo, which is about 71% of the populace. When you look at the total number of arrests, white people got arrested at twice the rate of black people. Why? Because there's more white people. That's why they got arrested twice the time as black people, because there's more white people, right? So in proportion to the numbers that they represent in the American populace, they got arrested twice as much as they did black people or any other race. Now, when you're looking at Asians, white got arrested at almost 200 times more likely than did Asians. But here's the interesting thing. Murder and non-negligent manslaughter. Black people got arrested at more than 2 times the rate of white people, when we only make up 14% of the population. And the murders that the black and African Americans got arrested for were not, if you look at the statistics on the FBI, you got to go to another chart, and I think that's 46A, and they look at the breakdown of the murders by race. Black people killed in this particular number here, 5,025. That number right there is about 9% black on white. So black people killing white people. It's about 9%. The majority of that number is black on black crime. I don't know how you explain that. So when you're looking at the numbers and the numbers by which they present, and you're looking at the populace of America and all that is America, the numbers bear themselves out. Okay. White people are in the back of police cars more than black people are in the back of police cars. At almost twice, it's actually about 2.5%, twice the number of black people. And again, everybody, FBI.gov, this is table 43, table 43A, if you want to go back and research this stuff for yourself. The numbers are there. So the idea that cops are avidly hunting down black people and killing them for sport is just not true. It's just not the numbers. It is not the numbers. It is just not the numbers. The numbers don't bear that information out. Now, if we're talking about feelings, if we're talking about the grievousness of when we see something like that happen, when we're talking about that, then we can get into the emotional aspect of it, but you got to look at the truth of the matter. So what does this mean for CRT? The hot debate that is CRT right now in our school systems, that is at the crux of CRT, critical race theory, at the crux of it, at the base of critical race theory, is pitting white against black. And listen, everybody, that is all that it is. That is all that it is. Do you know that the Atlanta Police Department is 69% black? In Atlanta, a major city in America, their police force is 69% black. They have a black mayor. Do you realize that the narrative that is being pushed is to pit one against the other, is to pit one race of people against another race of people? And I'm not saying, everybody, that we don't have issues that we got to talk through. But we have to be genuine. We have to be factual. We have to be authentic when we come into the table and talk about these issues that are plaguing Black America. And what's going on with Black America has a lot more to do with the pathology of Black America than it does the systematic racism or the structural racism that is in place to supposedly hold back Black America. It just has more to do with it. It just has more to do with it. And so I would invite you to have some very courageous conversations with people and really start talking about the stuff that will actually be beneficial for the conversation. Be beneficial for the conversation. Okay, everybody, I understand that there's some bad stuff that happens in life. But everybody, the cops are not actively hunting black people down and killing them ad nauseum. I get when the news source puts up this particular story, but I want to know why the news, why I had to search diligently to find out about those 74 people and had to search even more diligently to find out those 6 people's name who lost their lives over the weekend at the hands of another black person. Why did I have to search so diligently to find out the names of those people? Why was not that a topic of conversation? Why are we not marching for those who lost their lives in very violent ways? Why are they not getting memorials? Why are we not talking about them? Because the pathology is affecting the data. And so everybody, when you're talking about critical race theory, when you're talking about what this thing means in society today, how does it reach out? How does it affect my life? If you got kids that are in college right now, and not just in college, I'm talking even from middle school all the way up, but especially in high school and college, especially in high school and college. And that's why parents, I am urging you to go to these school board meetings. If you got kids that are in high school and that are in even in elementary and middle school, you need to go to these school board meetings. You need to find out what they are teaching our children. You need to find out. You need to be there. You need to be present. You need to be understanding what the curriculum is teaching. Because a lot of this stuff that is being taught in the classroom, if you understood what it was, you would never go for it. You would never go for it. But because we're not involved, because we don't go to PTO, because we don't go to the school board meetings, because we don't vote on that stuff, because we don't know who's on the actual board, we are oblivious to the facts. And because many of us don't engage our kids when they come home from school and say, hey, tell me about your day. What'd you learn today? Let's talk about it. Because we're not engaging our kids like that, guess what? We have no idea what's being taught to them. They're being indoctrinated with ideas that if you knew about it, you would strongly oppose. So this whole thing about CRT and being pushed inside of the classrooms of our schools today and on our college campuses and being taught in our military bases and to our first responders, this thing is going all over the place. It's pitting at the end of it, white against black. And finally, everybody, just hear my heart. Just please hear my heart in these last couple of seconds that I have with you. And just please hear my heart. Everybody, this thing is not that difficult. It's really not. I do believe that race is a social construct. I do believe that. I do believe that race is a social construct constructed by those in power to keep the power. I absolutely believe that. Am I optimistic that race can be destroyed? The social construct of race and racism can be destroyed? No, I'm not. I'm not confident in that, because even right now in 2021, wherever you go and apply for X, Y, and Z, you have to get through those 6 boxes. What are you? White, Caucasian, black, Pacific Islander, not Latino, whatever that is. That's still on every single application if it's regarding anything of value. So do I believe that constructionism will be eliminated? No, I don't. And maybe that's just me being pessimistic, but I don't believe that it is. But I do believe that race is a social construct. I do also believe, while that being true, I do not believe that the issues of our day are as prevalent as what they are being portrayed. They are issues, yes. Major issues, yes. But does it keep us from the table of conversation when we're being honest and transparent? No. So I want you to hear my heart, and I want you to hear from, as I stated to you in the beginning of all of this, that I am going to, my responsibility as a Christian, as a black man, and as an American are not in conflict. They're not in conflict, everybody. I'm quite capable of defending my positions because I do the work in making sure that before I stand up and use a megaphone and shout from any particular stance that I may be on, that I'm able to defend that from the left and from the right. So my responsibility as a Christian and a black man and an American are not in conflict. But we have to be able to have some honest conversations. When I filed for bankruptcy in 2004, I filed for bankruptcy, everybody, because I needed some financial relief. And the laws of America, I actually used to my benefit. The laws of America on bankruptcy, I used to my benefit. As I look back on bankruptcy now here in 2021, I can see that what led up to bankruptcy was, yes, there was not enough money that was coming in because I had a lot of responsibilities and things of that nature. A lot of stuff that was going on at the time that contributed to it. But when I look back on my filing of bankruptcy, I see some mismanagement of funds on my side. I see that I could have done better financially and made better financial decisions. And some of my financial decisions contributed greatly to my financial situation. I'm able to look back now and see the 30,000-foot view and are able to take some real responsibilities for what I did in that matter, for what I did, the choices I made. No one made me make those choices. I made them. And so I'm able to sit back and look at that and examine and watch this, pull from that, because I'm now at a place to where I can be honest with myself and look at myself in the mirror and pull some financial principles from that time and make a concrete assertion that I will never go back there, that I will never file for bankruptcy again, because I'm pulling from that particular situation some lessons that I had to learn. I had to learn that because of decisions that I made. And when we get to the place of putting people in the mirror and say, listen, let's talk about what you did. Let's talk about the choices that we made. Let's talk about the decisions that led up to that. Let's talk about why did we choose this over that? Why did we make that choice? And once we can get to that place to where we get accountability and responsibility square on the table, I promise you something, everybody. You're going to see people do a drastic change. You're going to see people get better in life when they learn how to handle decision making and when they take responsibility for the things that they did. But until we get there, the blame game is going to be ours. So everybody, that's critical race theory from a 30,000 foot view. That's critical race theory from a 1,000 point of view. Critical race theory is very complex, especially the movement that is the 2021 CRT. It is a complex, a lot of issues that kind of converge on one thing. But go back and try to understand the 5 tenets of CRT, and then that way it would help you to get a better understanding of CRT as a whole. Everybody, just remember, God is for you. And if God be for you, it's more than the entire world against you. I want you to be blessed. I want you to understand that if God be on your side, there is nothing that is impossible for God. Nothing is impossible for God. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Remember, those are the promises of God, and they're following you all the days of your life. Remember, be informed, be empowered. Studio B, we will see you next week.